Most people are looking at the Polaris RZR Pro R Max 2026 the wrong way. They're treating it like a stretched Pro R with extra seats. That's the easy take. But the more time I spent comparing specs, design choices, and how Polaris has been moving lately, the more I realized this machine is less about size and more about fixing a very specific problem Polaris created for itself. And yeah, that sounds dramatic, but hear me out. When the original Pro R came out, I noticed something right away. It was tough, really tough. The engine, the transmission, the overall build felt almost overbuilt compared to its competitors. But at the same time, it felt isolated. Like Polaris built a race-focused machine and forgot that most buyers don't actually race. The Pro R Max 2026 feels like Polaris responding to that realization. What surprised me first was not the length or the seating, it was the way Polaris seems to be softening the Pro R's personality without killing its identity. This doesn't look like a hardcore race rig pretending to be family-friendly. It looks like a machine designed for people who ride hard but still want comfort, range, and usability. That's an important difference. I compared this to the Turbo R and even the Can-Am Maverick R, and here's what stood out. The Pro R Max doesn't try to win the horsepower war. Polaris could have gone wild here. Bigger boost, crazier numbers, louder marketing. They didn't, and I think that was intentional. Most people miss this. Polaris is betting that durability and drivability matter more in the long run than peak numbers on a spec sheet. The naturally aspirated engine choice still feels like a statement. It says, you don't need forced induction to have fun, and you definitely don't need it to be reliable. For long desert trips, multi-day rides, and places where heat and maintenance matter, that choice makes more sense than people want to admit. Now let's talk about size, because this is where the misconceptions really start. Yes, the Pro R Max is bigger, longer wheelbase, more room, more presence. But bigger doesn't automatically mean worse handling. What I noticed is how Polaris has been tuning suspension geometry lately. They're not just adding length, they're balancing it. That extra length gives stability at speed, especially when the terrain gets unpredictable. Rock gardens, high-speed chop, deep sand. This thing looks like it wants to stay planted instead of twitchy. That's not exciting in a flashy way, but it's confidence-inspiring, and confidence lets you ride harder for longer. Here's the mistake I think a lot of buyers will make. They'll assume the Pro R Max is only for families or casual riders because it has extra seats. That's missing the point entirely. This is a machine for riders who want to go far, carry gear, bring friends, and still drive like they mean it. If anything, this feels like Polaris aiming at experienced riders who've outgrown two-seat machines. Another thing that caught my attention is the interior focus. Polaris has been quietly improving driver ergonomics, and the Pro R Max seems to lean into that. Seating position, visibility, and control layout all look more refined. Not flashy, just thoughtful. And thoughtful design matters when you're 5 hours into a ride and fatigue starts creeping in. I compared this mentally to older RZR XP models, and the difference is clear. Those felt raw. Fun, but raw. The Pro R Max feels intentional. Like Polaris sat down and asked what actually annoys people after the hype wears off. Heat management, noise, storage, ride harshness. All those small things add up. Here's a practical takeaway if you're considering this machine. If your riding is short, aggressive, and track style, the Pro R Max might actually feel like too much, too long, too composed. But if your rides are all day, mixed terrain, and unpredictable, this setup starts making a lot of sense. Another comparison worth mentioning is against Polaris' own lineup. The Turbo R still exists for a reason. That's the adrenaline machine. The Pro R Max feels more like the endurance athlete. Not slower, just calmer under pressure. And calm doesn't mean boring. I also think Polaris is future-proofing here. Emissions, reliability expectations, and buyer fatigue with constant maintenance are all real. This machine feels like it's designed to age well, not just impress on launch day. There's also something subtle happening with Polaris branding. The Pro R Max doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't need to. That confidence usually comes from companies that believe in their product, not just their marketing. Now, would I personally choose it over a two-seat Pro R? That depends. If I were riding solo or racing buddies every weekend, probably not. But for group rides, overland-style trips, or just wanting one machine that does almost everything without drama, this would be high on my list. One last thing most people won't think about until later: resale value. Machines that are versatile, reliable, and not over the stressed tend to hold value better.
I wouldn't be surprised if the Pro R Max ends up being one of those machines people regret selling. So my honest take, the Polaris RZR Pro R Max 2026 isn't trying to be the loudest or fastest in the room. It's trying to be the one you trust when the trail gets long, the terrain gets rough, and turning back isn't an option. And sometimes that's the most impressive kind of machine.